All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're welcome to the April edition of the Northwest Gas Association's monthly webinar series. This month, we're really tickled to be able to feature Brendan O'Brien, who is the Director of Energy Analysis at the American Gas Association. Brendan's been with the AGA for more than a decade. He specializes in gas utility core market analytics and industry financial benchmark studies. And is a specialist in the electrification of space heating, which is something that's of interest to all of us. Brendan leads the AGA's modeling efforts to demonstrate where customers can benefit the most from the direct use of natural gas. Just as an aside, I'll say, for those of you who are unaware, the American Gas Association has a very robust analytics department led by their Vice President, Richard Meyer. Brendan, maybe you can help me when you get started reminding people of what the actual department's title is, but we lean on them really heavily, and I'm really looking forward to Brendan's comments today, taking a look at electrification. The good news is also while they do a lot of national analysis, they have tools like the REMI model and others that make it possible for them to zero in a little more closely and get regionally relevant information. We've done some work with them in the past few years on some of these studies, and just had good data delivered to us. Not all of it told the story we wanted, but it's important to know what the data says. And so our region's a little bit unique. I'm sure Brendan could speak to that a little bit with our low cost hydropower, low cost energy in general, and vast hydropower reserves. Just makes it a little more challenging, but we still have a positive story to tell, even in the analytics, which Brendan will get into with us today. So with that, just a couple of reminders. We're going to keep our microphones muted. Use the chat function down there, usually at the bottom of your screen, maybe at the top, depending on where you're at. But use that chat function. I'll be monitoring it throughout the webinar today. I'll wait for Brendan to take a breath if you've asked a question before I interrupt him and pose the question to him. So use that chat function. And we are recording this event. Brendan, thanks for letting us do that. It'll be posted to our YouTube channel there. You see it on this slide. As well, if you're interested, I think we're distributing the slide deck afterwards to attendees on the webinar. So, yeah. So questions here, Judy says in your comment function. So, Brendan, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take it over from here. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
Can.
Awesome.
And there's your screen. Yep.
All right. My name is Brendan O'Brien. I'm a director at AGA. I've been part, as Dan pointed out, I've been part of AGA for at least 10 years, a member of our Energy Markets and Standards team. That name actually does change a lot. That's why there might be some confusion. But in a general sense, what we do at AGA is we act as sort of an internal consultant group. We analyze, we even amongst ourselves debate a lot of what's happening in the natural gas market. That could be the price of energy, or it could be the direction we think consumers will go in terms of continue to use natural gas, right? Their furnaces, their heat pumps, whatever. And then of course that might digress into further and further details when it comes to individual regions. As you guys are well aware, Pacific Northwest is unique in its own ways, but also the rest of the United States is very unique in its own ways. So this analysis is for this particular iteration is still focused on a national level, but I will and can talk further about regional differences as we go. I'm hoping for the next iteration this year to include at least some kind of 9, or actually more of like a 11 or 12 census region, just based on how the electric grid works, breakout of how you know, individual parts of the country might look as opposed to just the national view. Now, this study overall is a very basic idea of, this is a house. This is a new house, and we're going to show competitively how different appliances will cost, uh, what their emissions might look like, where the future might be, both for gas and electric, and basically show more or less how they sort of stack up, right? But what's new, and I think very different than what a lot of our analyses have been done by other organizations like, for example, Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, where they're coming from the opposite direction, is we're going to talk about the marketplace first. We're going to try to at least discuss the preference for natural gas, but also where it is optimally being used and where builders are focusing on it too. And the reason for that is that when we go through this analysis and costs and emissions, we're going to keep going back and being able to point out why this is optimal for the current consumer, and why homeowners, especially because this is a new construction analysis, why they prefer natural gas more than others in new buildings. So this is kind of a four-step key findings from this particular study, starting with the fact that natural gas is preferred, especially in new homes. And not only is it preferred, but it is highly preferred in terms of efficiency. This is an opportunity to install the most efficient gas appliances from the get-go because it's a new home, and overwhelmingly, at least three-quarters, and you'll see that share grows the colder and colder the climate is, especially in the Pacific Northwest. You'll see it's even higher than that. It is a high preference for builders to put the most efficient gas appliances in. And as a result, there's tremendous cost savings, both in terms of just minimum efficiencies, gas versus heat pump, but also the fact that even against the cold climate, the fact that the average new build starts off with all condensing home, there's tremendous savings there too. And because of that mix match in terms of where gas just by default, because it makes sense for the builder to put condensing in homes, as a result, natural gas homes actually start off with a much better footing when it comes to environmental benefits by using natural gas than, say, building all electric. And again, of course, we'll talk a little bit about the future with gas heat pumps, gas hybrid systems as well. So again, as I said, pointed out before, we're going to start off talking about the market share. And this is something that I can digress in a little bit further details on the regional level, just on top of my head if I want to. But this is where I think that this analysis starts to break out in something a little different than what you'll see from other organizations and how they approach electrification and how you model it. And the reason why is, at least from the opinion of AGA, is that this is not everyone in the same pie. This is actually two separate universes of homes where one has access to natural gas and the other one doesn't. And for those that don't have access to natural gas, the lower bar, you actually find a lot of electrification happening. And the reason why is likely that either due to cost effectiveness or just a fact that maybe people don't like having their fuel oil have price spikes in the middle of the winter. They have been gradually further electrifying because there's no other option. There's natural gas isn't even an option. And that's actually where we see the most adoption of heat pumps, as well as even electrical resistance, because even though that's a far more expensive way to heat your home, that is the most reasonable, long-term, cheapest option for those who don't have natural gas. However, if you do live inside the service territory of natural gas, it is overwhelmingly the primary fuel source. 84% of homes that have access to natural gas or think they have access to natural gas use it. Predominantly, they have at least one. I mean, they of course have one appliance, but they definitely use a furnace, many of which actually have 2 or 3 appliances on average. You have a furnace tied with a water heater or a stove. And it's actually, when you go inside that bubble of where gas is available, you actually have the least adoption of heat pump, as opposed to other scenarios. You actually do see a lot more electrical resistance relative to other technologies. And simply that might just be because of the house or the economics that goes into that decision. But when you have access to natural gas, you actually do see an overwhelming decision by the homeowners or their owners that are renting it out to use natural gas and continue to use natural gas when it, again, is available. This is important because, again, when it comes to policy decisions, this should not be blended together. They should be treated separately. We should be driving towards energy efficiency on the gas side because it's a preferred choice when it's accessible. And it's okay to also incentivize other options when it's not. Now, that was a slice of the pie for all households. This analysis is going to be focusing more on new construction. This is the most recent survey from the census on new construction. And what you'll see is overall, natural gas is actually fairly about, well, it's 44% of all homes, but that is wildly weighted based off the South. When it comes to, not just a desire to have natural gas in the home, but the desire to save money on heating costs, when you start looking at the Northeast, the Midwest, and even the West, and this is the entire region, including California, natural gas is the preferred choice because of that desire to have a low cost, robust operational way to heat your home. That becomes a priority. And these are for builders who are trying to market their home. And as you'll see later, there are some ramifications for the builders to decide that choice, but that they prefer natural gas in these colder climates because they know that this is what consumers are preferring. And so even though it's 44% nationally, once you take out the South, it's suddenly 80%. It's 5-1 preferred. And the colder it gets, and I know the Pacific Northwest tends to be in a more of a zone, I guess 5 or 6, depending on where you're at, maybe 5 in terms of heating degree days. It is overwhelmingly, there's a high desire for condensing appliances as a default choice for all, both new builds and probably for existing homes as well. The South is unique though, because you have a lot of development. A lot of growth in housing stock over the last 20 years has been in the South. And so even though it is overwhelmingly seems to be drifting towards electrification in terms of that new build, part of that has less to do with the desire for electrification and way more to do with the fact that you just have urban sprawl. You have growth that goes well beyond the main. And so you just can't capture those specific customers. The fact that you have almost as many customers, actually more so in the South, even than you have in the West. So California being a giant juggernaut of a state, you have this huge growth in gas customers in the South. You just cannot possibly hook them all up quick enough, frankly, to make them all meet the same market share as you see in these other regions, despite the fact that there's a difference in terms of climate. All right, so let's move on to the model itself. I spoke before that this analysis is in a lot of ways going to be similar to others. We're going to be looking at a single house. We're going to be putting in different appliances with different fuels. The idea is to create an apples to apples comparison of what it takes to operate this house over the next 15 years, what the climate impacts are, and some of the benefits that either the homeowners or the builders might see in a natural gas home as opposed to, say, an all-electric one. We will also include some analysis on RNG as well. We are looking to, in the next version this year, expand that analysis to do more ranges. Less because we think that there's a problem with having less RNG. In fact, it's the opposite. We found in the new model that any level of RNG is beneficial to consumers. And so we are going to extrapolate a much larger range in the next version. But you'll see what is an even higher threshold for RNG and how it has a minimal impact on consumers' bills, but has a gigantic impact in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions. All right, for starts, again, I said before that this is like an apple-to-apples comparison of a single house, right? It's the same building, same comparison of like what this house entails. It's based on the average, excuse me, it's based on the average new building. The model itself is taken from a file that Department of Energy developed. So we're actually pulling from something that is already accessible online. We changed a few features in order to make sure that they would match what we think the average gas home looks like or what the average electrified home looks like. But the idea was to kind of, again, create this single house, put different appliances, and be able to compare sort of at a technology level where we are and where we're heading. And so what you see is 6 different houses. Uh, 2 of them are electric, 4 of them are gas. But really, it's siloed by 3 different versions. So we have a baseline. This is representing the average household that exists today. There's the advanced, and then there's emerging, where we're going to look at some hybrids and we're going to look at some natural gas heat pump outcomes as well. The one thing to take, and going back to the market shares before, is that when it comes to new construction, that advanced natural gas home, this all condensing home, is actually quickly becoming the standard. 75% of all homes that are built with natural gas already come with that high efficiency gas furnace. IRA benefits incentivize even higher thresholds, and we're seeing a significant uptake in these what I call maximum efficiency furnaces. And because homes are built with a condensing furnace, they almost always come with a condensing water heater as well. And we're seeing a lot of the tankless market going towards that new build scenario as well.
So Brendan,
On the other hand,
I have a question here just on this slide.
mhm.
First, are these full fuel cycle numbers? So 99% COP tanked water heater, that includes line losses and average energy efficiency of whatever's being produced. What's the assumption that underlies that? And then another
the
question is, it looks to me like a heat pump air conditioner is pretty much equivalent to just a standalone air conditioner for air conditioning. Now it's more efficient, certainly for heat, but for air conditioning, am I reading that correctly?
I'll start with the last question first, because yes, that was on purpose. We were trying to make this again apples to apples as much as possible. So the for an 8.8 to a 9.0 HSPF heat pump, the SEER rating generally lines up with an Energy Star minimum efficiency air conditioning unit. And so when we look at the minimum efficiency gas home, this default 80% AOP furnace, it also got Energy Star air conditioning unit.
And
So
then
yeah,
for
that
the
was deliberate also, because we will look at numbers that don't just include the electrified appliances, but the total
yeah.
home. This is kind of on purpose, because as we go through this over the next couple of years, as we further develop this analysis, we really do want to target not just decarbonizing the gas appliances, but creating both just discussing it, but also a pathway towards decarbonizing the whole home in general. And the goal is to incentivize and point out that, hey, an air conditioning unit is also important, even if it has nothing to do with natural gas. It is certainly a part of the heat pump. And so we are encouraging, or at least setting the bar at the same level, that your air conditioning unit would be the similar rating that the heat pump would have provided.
Yeah, and then the other question is it full fuel cycle, so source
This is
versus
not.
efficiency? So this is site
This
efficient.
is this is consumer. This is the Home Depot aisle.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the high level, that analysis pointed out very quickly that there is a significant cost saving with natural gas, right? This is just for the cost of operating the home for those natural gas appliances. We can break this out into more detail. This is kind of our presentation slide deck. If you can go on the AGA's website, you'll find a more detailed version of all these slides that actually show what's going on behind it. But generally speaking, we found it didn't really matter what appliance you had. Natural gas was a far more cost-effective way to heat the home. Now, Pacific Northwest is a little different. When it comes to cost, certainly the heat pump is going to be far more dependent on the outdoor air temperature than the rest of the country. Pacific Northwest tends to not have below freezing days, but it has a lot of heat and degree days. So you'll be running that system longer than other parts of the country, but you might not get as cold. That being said, natural gas does still have very similar economic benefits that you see on this chart, even in that kind of climate. But that's not the only thing. You do still see a significant savings by upgrading your heat pump. If you are going to talk about natural gas, you do have to reference the fact that it is very important to look at efficiency for electric, as not always the same. Recent article from Washington Post was pointing out that, or at least attempting to point out that it doesn't really matter. Minimum efficiency heat pump, same as gas. Not all this case. For one, it doesn't even qualify for any of the tax benefits, let alone your utilities benefits. You need to upgrade to something further in order to actually take advantage of any kind of tax cut in order to install that appliance. The same thing's case for further and further efficiency. It's very difficult for consumers to install these higher and higher efficiency appliances. There is savings to it, but natural gas does have a tremendous efficiency gain when you start finding yourself at these lower levels. When it comes to the long-term cost of that fuel, uh, there's a significant benefit of natural gas simply because of the actual cost of molecules relative to electrons. The fact that it's 3.4 times cheaper for natural gas. Now, depending upon whether or not you're up to date, the annual energy outlook skipped a year. It actually just came out, I think, yesterday, or 2 days ago. And their updated version of this particular analysis actually is fairly unchanged. The idea that natural gas is going to, or at least their forecast for natural gas prices going out until 2050, still has it at the same point, where it's about 3.4, 3.5 times cheaper to use natural gas over electricity.
So Brennan, you just made my day because now I know I get to spend some time with the spreadsheet. I love the EIA stuff and spend a lot of time with it. So I'm really glad it's out and look forward to hearing.
The
I just want to point
the,
out for our crew
yeah.
that these numbers are very similar to data, actually past data. This is forecast, obviously, but the numbers are a little lower. So whether this is delivered energy, and so it's delivered the full all-in cost delivered to the homeowner. In this case, it's about 2.8 times more expensive per unit of energy electricity. It's around 11 to maybe we're up around 12 or 13 in the last year dollars per decatherm, versus about $33 per decatherm equivalent of electricity. So just pointing out that, it's a little lower, as you might expect from some of the idiosyncrasies of our region, but the multiples are roughly the same. So thanks.
Well,
Thanks for letting me add in.
oh, of course, but yeah, you guys, EA is not really factoring in the load growth potential, right?
Right.
Of what may or may not happen over the next 10 years, right? This is still fairly based on our expectations of needing electricity at the same rate we've been doing, right? AI certainly is going to have a huge impact on that, depending on where it's being built. Pacific Northwest being no exception to that. I will point out to anyone who wants to go right now to EA's website. At least yesterday, the regional data is not available. It looks like it is. When you download the file, it's last year's. So, refresh that one a couple times. I guess as we'll go through this analysis, the Cambian is out, coincidentally the same exact day as the AEO. It's not much, it's very little difference between the 2023 version of it. This model will be based on the 2022 version. When we do our new update to this analysis this year, it'll include both the 2022, 2023, and I guess the 2024, because it's extremely similar to 2023. All right, so let's move along further. So what is unique and different about this analysis as opposed to, well, both others and ones that AGA has done in the past is by using this model from DOE, using Energy Plus. They provided a pre-built model of what they think an average new home looks like. We're able to actually get metered, or at least simulated metered data down to the hour. But of course, we can extrapolate that up to the month and look at what the average bill is for these households. And so this is important for a variety of reasons. It shows both the cost of natural gas being far lower seasonally, and the fact that you have just a general less extremes when it comes to winter heating. Something we're going to look a little bit more detailed in the new model for this year is that something really important is to make sure that we also were correctly addressing fixed costs. This might be less of an issue for Pacific Northwest. I do know the Midwest, like Ohio, there's been a lot of flags thrown up about fixed costs being a little too high. This actually does credibly include the idea that seasonally, even in the summer, if all you're using is water heating or cooking, that fixed cost is part of this bill. And despite that levelized yearly, part that customer charge, natural gas still comes out as not only a cheaper annually, but monthly, and with way less price shocks, frankly, from that weather effect that you'll see in, say, January. Dan?
Get ready to transition, Brendan, to the next slide. I just want to remind people, use the chat function. Brendan would be happy to answer questions, probably would enjoy that opportunity. So if you have any, make sure you use that chat function. We're paying attention to it, and I know he'd love to answer your questions.
Yeah, and again, you can. I'm getting the sense that Dan would prefer you put this in the chat so there's a record, but you can also just chime in as we go. I'm more than happy to try to tease out specific details if you see them. Now, when it comes to construction costs, and again, if you go to the actual website, you'll see way more detailed in these bars. There's a little bit more of a story to talk about. And this goes back to that market share analysis. And that's why we focused on it first and foremost. Natural gas technically is not the cheapest home to build. Heck, you could put in an electrical resistance furnace and save even more money if you're a builder. But that doesn't mean that sells. That doesn't mean that that's what the consumer wants. That doesn't mean it's what the builder thinks is the most marketable home. As a result, we actually find that there isn't much of a difference between a minimum efficiency gas home and a maximum efficiency gas home. In fact, most of that delta is the fact that we are building in a slightly better water heater that does tend to be preferred by in new builds. The exception, of course, is that yes, it could be cheaper, especially with IRA benefits, to build that all-electric home. That is what we're seeing in the South, where heating is less of a focus. The weather tends to be way more moderate and colder or warmer. And so the focus isn't quite the same. But again, when it comes to energy efficiency, the better you go with that heat pump, the more you're going to save. There's a huge difference between natural gas and these higher and higher efficiency cold climate heat pumps. So much so that there actually is some wiggle room for hybrids and even gas heat pumps as a cheaper alternative for a new build than even just a very high efficiency all electric home. And again, this goes back to that market share analysis, trying to explain maybe why there's some decisions going on. If you're in a moderate to cold climate, it's almost overwhelmingly driven towards natural gas. This is a money saver. It is a operational saver for homeowners. Excuse me. In the South, where there's a lot of building happening, you just don't have the main, literally the actual gas pipes to connect to these homes. And so you see a lot more heat pumps being installed there. Oh, and only because this has been asked before, that gas heat pump home, there are gas heat pumps going into households. That delta between the advanced natural gas home and the gas heat pump home, that is actually fairly reasonable based off of the likely margins that a builder might apply to that house with the gas heat pump, the cost of the actual equipment, above and beyond the fact that there's some savings on the exhaust from the house, since the gas heat pump would be installed exterior instead of interior to the home. So this is actually not fairly off from what certain manufacturers have said this might cost to build a gas heat pump home. The challenge, of course, is that there aren't the volumes in order to push gas heat pumps. So that's why it's in the emerging technology. But the hybrid home does fall into it's technically more expensive than building a straight gas home, but it's far cheaper and far environmentally beneficial than going straight for the all electric high efficiency gas home. Oh, sorry, all efficient electric home. All right, so let's move on to the actual emissions. So first and foremost, this is something that I can spend on hours talking about. is excuse me. So our model relies off of the Cambian database for electric emissions. And there are a number of findings from that. First and foremost, we are looking at long-term marginal rates. This analysis is looking at electrification. There are differences when you talk about emissions. I feel that if you're talking about a city street and everyone's already using what they're using, then you use averages. Average gas, average electric. But if you're talking about shifts towards a certain technology like electrification, policy driven especially, you need to look at that marginal rate above and beyond. And so when it comes to emissions in this analysis, we will be extrapolating from that long-term marginal rate. But it doesn't get to zero, even though there are countless, at this point, policies that are encouraging zero or near zero emissions for entire states. There still is a solid dependence on natural gas as a part of that mix, even going out to 2040 and frankly 2050. This analysis will go through the 2040 period because it's the life of the appliance, but this same chart is still relevant when it comes to further out timelines. On the natural gas side, there's a couple of choices with this analysis that we're going to draw out further in the next version of it. But we are basing our analysis for natural gas in the future for it on the AGF study for renewable natural gas, where there is a potential for natural gas to, be about 32% of the entire United States residential commercial demand. For context, since we are starting in year zero or year one for this analysis, the current analysis is about 2%, which is up from about 1% a year or two ago. So we are actually in the beginning, but a growing acceleratory stage of RNG becoming a far more normalized part of the energy mix, and frankly, quickly drawing towards these kinds of outcomes. Now, by looking at this analysis from AGF, where it's about 30% by 2040, that averages out to about 20% a year. For this analysis, we are purposely trying to simplify the analysis to about 20% per year as part of the mix, not only to make it easier to digest the emissions reductions, but also for the bill savings, because ultimately that is just as important as it comes, or the bill costs, as it just as important as it is to the emissions reductions. A 20% inclusion of RNG based off of the AGF study was approximately an increase of about $92. You could probably round up, frankly, to $10 a month or $120 a year, which is far less than even the current average customer charge you would see on a bill. And in regards to that, you get a 20% reduction in your emissions, largely in part because of the current development in agricultural resources for RNG, creating a net neutral benefit from that new fuel. Right now, largely agricultural residue, animal manure, and landfill gas are predominantly the main resources that are feeding RNG development today. This is big because even if you were to take the least beneficial version of this, you still cut emissions by about 70%. The 96% is that average mix, because a lot of agricultural resources are actually negative emissions and result to making use of something that otherwise was just being wasted. And again, this is based off this AGF study. It's approximately 50 to 60% higher in terms of how we're equating that price for an RNG fuel. I have seen up to 100% increase, and it still does not break the economics of what our model shows as being beneficial to consumers. That 100% though tends to be on a voluntary scale, and it is largely based off of legacy RNG resources like strictly landfill gas. And in frank honesty, it is in competition with transportation fuels. As RNG grows, There's only so much can go to one sector, so that price should come down. All right, so let's move on to the model. So these costs are the levelized, based off of 2024 dollars. This is the full in cost to build, to operate over 15 years, all of these different appliances in these different homes. And what we saw was universally natural gas, and this is true in the new version that's yet to be released. Natural gas was the cheaper option to operate no matter what you did. And this includes that 20% incremental cost of RNG over the next 15 years. If you are a consumer and you have on-bill financing for you to choose RNG as part of your bill, this is exactly what that life cycle cost would look like. And as these arrows point out, the most popular homes for new construction point towards the all condensing gas home, which is frankly even higher in the Pacific Northwest than other places. Again, going back to that, even though you don't get super cold, you do have very high heating degree days. So there is a general desire for efficient heating appliances in your home. On the other hand, when it comes to heat pumps, you don't see quite the same market share move towards the higher and higher efficiency models. IRA benefits, local utility benefits, they all stop at Energy Star. And with IRA, Energy Star did move up a little bit. So if you're in a northern climate, you do require a cold climate heat pump. In the case of Pacific Northwest, if you happen to live on the coast where the majority of the people are, that's not going to quite make the same difference as it does if you happen to live further into the states. So at least as far as nationally is concerned, we still see a lot of consumers defaulting towards whatever the general Energy Star level is, that 9.0 HSPF model. And of course, electrical resistance is far higher. When it comes to emissions, the more efficient, the better. That gas home actually competes with the all-electric heat pump home, even the higher efficiency version of it. And this is where we get this analysis that, again, natural gas homes built today on average tend to not only save consumers money, but actually end up with lower emissions. It's because of this market share analysis. It's because the majority of centrally heated homes that aren't natural gas, they tend to go towards the minimum efficiency or the first tier of Energy Star and not anything higher. And as a result, those homes built with gas actually from the get-go turn out to have lower life cycle cost emissions. Another thing I want to point out before we go to the next slide is the fact that there's not a whole lot of different life cycle costs between the two electrified versions. This is another challenge. Again, taking the gas hat off and taking the electrification or energy efficiency hat on, this is why people aren't gravitating towards higher and higher efficiency electric appliances, which would be in competition with gas as far as operating costs. The life cycle costs are not much different. You have significantly higher upfront costs that are not necessarily displaced by the long-term savings. To quote Energy Star themselves, there's a reason they choose specific efficiency levels. They see that as the most cost-effective adoption tier. Natural gas, even at 97+%, is a very, very affordable version of how to heat your home as opposed to, say, a significantly higher HSPF 10, 11, 12, or even 13 to get to geothermal. None of those things are considered or even talked about as being a next level tier because they're just not cost effective enough to get people to come out and install them. And you can see that in this data, the fact that they're basically the same. And that's a challenge for environmental concerns because even though you have the same life cycle costs, you have far higher upfront costs. And that's a big barrier for individuals to make that commitment. Now, for fun, and I'm hoping to try to find new ways to try to explore this further, is we also did what if you did 100% RNG? This is not a realistic stance for everyone, certainly not even in a localized region, but it does show the potential because not only does it neutralize effectively your carbon footprint from your gas appliances, but it lowers the rest of your house's footprint so that you can start to think about, okay, if I do rooftop solar, suddenly I'm not just net neutral, I'm net negative. I'm a money producing house, and I'm also reducing the climate impact of my home to the point where I'm actually taking some of the bite out of my neighborhood. So this is a big deal. Not really going to work with just a straight minimum efficiency gas furnace. I have some numbers next to those bars. Those are the number of MMBTUs that home would consume over a year. The average home in the US uses about 67 MMBTUs a year. So it's not particularly reasonable to say everyone can do this. But if you happen to invest in a gas heat pump, or you have a hybrid system, suddenly you actually do find yourself in a place where you could reduce your emissions to a point where a combination of natural gas and solar, especially in a shaded or in an older home where the roof might just not be in the right spot, suddenly you actually can achieve a net neutral home with the least number of changes. You don't need to go out and actually retrofit your entire house. You can actually just simply upgrade your furnace or replace your AC with a heat pump and put solar on your roof, and suddenly you actually are today, not waiting for it, today able to actually meet these kinds of these goals. With that, that's actually the end of the presentation, but I do want to open it up to any questions you might have.
Yeah, so go ahead and take a minute here to enter in questions you might have. Jose had a question for me about what the typical heat pump rebates are in states in the Northwest. I just saw, I was doing some internet research, and it looked to me like for a heat pump space heating, you could get maybe, depending on the utility you're with through the state, like upwards of $8,000 for a rebate and tax credits and the like on a space heat.
That might be
Pretty,
for low income.
yeah, it's mostly
Un
focused on low income, the higher the numbers. And then there are utility specific programs, and they're typically in around the, depending on the utility and what they're trying to accomplish, 1,500 to 2 grand in that general neck of the woods.
that makes a bit more sense. Again, the being neutral to all of this. The challenge with electrification is that there really isn't a strong incentive over the life of the equipment, or even just a shorter time frame, to go higher than just meeting that first threshold. Things have improved. Energy Star, you might not have an 11 HSPF heat pump. You can have a 9, and it'd be cold climate, and you are required in the north to have a cold climate in order to meet IRA benefits. But it doesn't mean anyone goes anywhere further than that. And so a few $1,000s may not actually amount to enough for consumers to actually make the difference. When it comes to northern climates, I think in the New England region, it's a very different story. We're seeing that fewer homes are switching from fuel oil or propane to gas, or they're keeping their gas, or they're keeping their propane or fuel oil and putting in ductless heat pumps because they have radiators. And it's just a far more reasonable, cost-effective choice to make that iteration as opposed to putting in ductwork and actually trying to convert your fuel. That is the only outlier. Everywhere else, we're seeing you're replacing your resistance with a heat pump, you're upgrading your old heat pump with a better heat pump. We are quite excited by IRA in that when it came to the gas furnaces, the requirement was that you had to have a 97% AFUE furnace to get the $600. And prior to it, based off of data collected from actually the furnace rule, for those who spent way too much time on that, it amounted to maybe 1% of the market prior to IRA. And now we think that maybe 12% of the market or 14% of the market is actually putting in maximum efficiency furnaces nationwide, just based off of that $600 difference. So it kind of depends on where you're at. The $8,000 you're talking about heat pumps, that is definitely for lower income.
Right.
I do know from IRA, only maybe 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of any of the tax credits. So it could be insulation, windows, solar panels, and furnaces. Only maybe 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 took advantage of any of the credits were low income. So whether it be to improve your gas furnace or install a heat pump, the burden is still very difficult, even at $8,000 for someone who is on the lower income threshold. I've worked at least for a year or so in Office of Weatherization at DOE. It goes well beyond just simple economics when it comes to upgrading lower income homes. There's a lot of hurdles that individuals need to overcome in order to make those improvements. Um, so I would not, they're not quite the same, but
Right. And just to reemphasize your point, $8,000 on a $10,000 to $12,000 purchase. If you're at 150% of, uh, minimum poverty, whatever the number is, it's still a lift, right? And that doesn't count whatever retrofit you might need to do to make the heat pump work. That's just the appliance. In Oregon's starting up a project or a program this year, here anytime now, actually, which will offer 3,000 incentives at 3,000 rebates basically at $2,000 a piece. So, and that's generally for the program is called the Oregon Heat Pump Purchase Program. It's money that $6 million that the state legislature allocated for this purpose as part of their budget. And we're seeing the same kind of thing happen in Washington State, just extra dollars being allocated. It's a lot more than 6 million in Washington State. It's more like 75 million being allocated to this specifically to facilitate or facilitate the adoption of heat pumps in homes. So
and on the national level, what we're seeing, in terms of just general market share metrics, is that people aren't necessarily electrifying, but they are upgrading out of resistance. At least as far as this model, again, was a single family new home, but you could kind of come up with a similar idea for an existing single family home. In fact, many of these costs aren't that much different, simply because an older home might be less efficient from an envelope perspective, but the home itself is smaller, so the bills are actually fairly similar. Uh, you see a lot of upgrading for what you have, not necessarily changing fuels. And there are about as many single family homes using electrical resistance right now as there are heat pumps. So there's a tremendous market to just upgrade the existing electric homes, which in a in a in a in 2025 where abundance is a big deal, honestly, focusing on just upgrading electric homes to better electric homes is a huge win for many households. And the focus on upgrading old gas homes to better gas homes is, again, similar story. Huge upgrade for individuals and their homeowners, like just general um,
right, right. And from
economics.
the perspective of the Northwest Gas Association, we've been advocating that approach. I mean, one of the things we've said in both Washington and Oregon, in particular, British Columbia to a lesser degree, is you ought to focus on electric resistance heating before you start looking at switching fuels. Just get
Mhm.
those electric homes to be more efficient homes, and there's a lot of them out there. And anyway, we have a political environment that some on the call are very familiar with because they encounter it too. And that's okay. We're working real hard in that regard. But this is super useful information, Brendan. Thank you very much to the group on the call. We'll be distributing Brendan's slide deck to you. It will include his contact info, so you can contact him directly if you have questions, or if you want, contact us, and we'll work with them. If you've got ideas of things that we can ask the AGA to do, I'm not volunteering all of their modeling and time, but we work with them closely, and if we come up with some good things that they would find that all of their members would find useful to know, they're more than happy to help us with that kind of stuff, bandwidth permitting. So make sure we stay in touch. Brendan, again, thank you very much.